My name is Reddy Kadasani. I'm the practice director at Tallan for SharePoint and Office 365. A little bit about Tallan as a national systems integrator. We have a number of offices throughout the United States, and Hartford is our headquarters. We have an office in New York, Boston, Tampa, Washington, D.C., and South California. We are a gold partner with Microsoft. We have numerous clients around the United States in various different areas. So Tallan not only does SharePoint, but also we have practices that specialize in mobile development, user experience, e-commerce, business intelligence, and application integration with BizDoc and Windows Azure. So now that we have that out of the way, let's start with the series itself. I just wanted to thank you all for taking the time to attend today's webinar on building a foundation through an effective information architecture. Today's webinar is the first in a series of webinars on creating a strategy to build effective enterprise portals using SharePoint. We have planned out 2 other webinars in this series around social enterprise search and findability. Final webinar, what we call the integrated portal, where we are going to discuss and demonstrate how to integrate external systems such as line of business applications and BI dashboards in SharePoint. Our objective for this SharePoint strategy series is twofold. Firstly, outline a specific process that you can follow to design an enterprise intranet portal with productivity, collaboration, findability at its core. And secondly, share with you tools and techniques that we have found useful through our engagements with other customers and clients that you can use to implement enterprise portals through SharePoint. Just wanted to kind of lay down the platform that we're going to use for this webinar series. We're going to do most of our demos in SharePoint, Office 365, and for the second webinar, we're going to have some SharePoint apps that are going to be hosted through Windows Azure. So we're going to mix it up a little bit with on-prem and on-cloud solutions and show you the gamut of custom applications that you can develop on SharePoint and the out-of-the-box capabilities that both SharePoint On-Prem and SharePoint Online offer. So for today's discussion, we will focus on building a foundation, or what I call as blueprint, for your enterprise portals. We'll first cover the key challenges that information workers face when working with content, the state of intranets today, and we'll look at some common scenarios that employees and organizations face when working with data, and then go through some best practice tools and techniques and IA processes to help you manage the assets in your organization. The reason I say assets and not just content is because assets covers more than just documents in your organization. Assets is about conversations, ideas, it could be surveys, meeting minutes, videos, images, people, and their expertise, and so on. We'll go through a demonstration of a functional SharePoint environment where some of these IA principles have been applied, and what we'll step through is some basic search capabilities or search enhancements in SharePoint. We'll also go through some SharePoint features or SharePoint templates that have been added to SharePoint 2013 to provide a seamless interface for the users. And finally, you'll get a sneak preview of the content for our next webinar in this series. The reality with intranet and extranet portals today. When you think about information, what comes to mind first? Is it an unsurmountable mess, or is it something that you think is more organized, maybe tucked away in filing cabinets and shared folders or network drives? Difficult to get to, though. Or do you see your organization as a well-oiled machine, or maybe you want to get to a point where you're a well-oiled machine where data flows seamlessly between different systems in your organization, and ideas and conversations flow smoothly between your employees? Or is information contained in silos? So let's talk about the state of the intranet portals today. There are over about 100 million intranet portals in use today, and half of the users spend about 10% of their work week just looking for content, just looking for stuff. And that does not include the time that that they waste redoing work that has already been done in the organization or exists somewhere in the organization, but they weren't able to find it, so they had to recreate it. In addition, I also like to add here is that when you're tasked with doing research or developing new content for your organization, where do you go? Usually users go to Google or Bing or any other search engine, internet search engine, enter their keywords and try to find information there. Wouldn't it be nice if you could do the same thing on your internet portal and actually use information that has been created in your organization? So apart from actually finding information where people are not able to find the relevant information, if it exists already in your portals or in your organization, whether it's on file shares or other disk drives or external systems or line of business systems, there are other considerations or challenges that organizations face, like, for instance, outdated information, numerous versions of the same document, for instance, lack of communication. So everybody is busy doing their own stuff in their own departments. There is no communication or cross-communication between departments, between projects and products that companies are developing. And most of the processes are manual and inefficient, even if they're automated. And so the question then arises is that if there exists a system that you can put all this together and make a seamless system happen, what is the cost of the overall solution and what is the return on investment on that solution, and if it's maintainable and extensible? So all these are real-world challenges organizations face on a day-to-day basis. So let's look at some of the scenarios. For this presentation, I'm going to keep it simple. We're going to talk about file shares, databases, it could be line of business data systems, or some other third-party like your CRM or ERP database, or maybe an external partner portal, or email. And if a user comes in and says, well, I want to find, sales documents, for instance, where do they go to find that information? Potentially to all these three systems, which have very different interfaces, very different usabilities. And if they're lucky, they'll probably find information that connects them. Usually it's the user who has to connect the dots. So let's look at what are the issues with each one of these. Let's look at the file servers first. Let me just zoom in here. So here I have a lot of documentation, a lot of documents, images, PowerPoints, Word documents, and it's a typical file share. It has statement of works, NDAs, so on and so forth, PowerPoint presentations from sales and marketing and training materials. As you see, the highlighted portion here, this document called Technology Partners SOW V1. There's also another document here, if you see up top next to the document Salesforce, which says Technology Partners SOW. So what I've done here is, shown a typical file share where there is no way to store versions of documents. So if I wanted to create a new version, or if I wanted to add more content to a particular document and use that as a new document, but I don't want to get rid of the old one, I would have to rename it, put a date or some kind of characters at the end, like in this case V1, to signify that it's a new version or version 1 of the document. So data freshness, file history, and revision history. All right. So let's look at another problem with file shares usually. So I have three folders here. The first one is called clients, and under the clients I have a file called final, NDA, and SOW. Right? I've got 3 files in there. Now someone comes across this file share. They're not really sure where to put the content. They create a folder called new folder, and for whatever reason they don't rename it. And you see that in file shares all the time. And put the same documents, NDA, SOW, and final in here. Somebody else comes in and thinks that should be classified under the folder Technology Partners. Creates a new folder called Technology Partners and puts the same documents, final, NDA, and a few other documents in the file share. So I have 3 copies of the same document in different folders, one of them called new folder, And the file names are ambiguous as well. I don't know what these files mean. What is final? What is NDA? Technology partners. Which partner is this NDA for? And so on and so forth. So if I wanted to search for an NDA for one of my partners, what would I search on? Just NDA, right? And then I would come in here and I would have to open each document and figure out which NDA was I looking for. If I come in here and look at final, I'm like, final what? The point I'm trying to make is that it's very easy to create storage of content and documents that contain duplicates, don't really have any metadata associated with it, meaning if someone else comes to this same folder and tries to search for something, they don't know what final or NDA means. They don't know what the author of this content meant when they first created that content. Let's look at the external applications problem. So the issue here, of course, is that you have other systems that help your organization run and hum, right? For instance, you might have a CRM system, you might have an ERP system, or you might have a product catalog or sales order catalog where you store all your product or line of business data. So where is this data? It's probably residing in some data silo. It's an own database. And if I want to interact with it, it has a different interface. I need to go there, find my information, maybe download it, relate it to another document that I'm authoring. And the problem with that becomes is that when I try to link content that's in file shares, for instance, in this case, I have a folder called server name folder 1 files. The problem with storing files in file shares or network shares is that someone else could come in and move these folders around, and now this link will never work. Either I have to maybe clean it up by knowing where I put these links, or the person who's moving the files has to know that they have to go in and clean all the other systems where these links exist. So this is another example of an external system where we have a database of products, and so the products live in their own database, and if I had product-related documentation, it lives in a content management system somewhere or a file share, and there's no real relationship between the two. Emails. So emails is a favorite for everyone because we all share documents with our customers or or other employees within our organization through email. It's the easiest way to do it. Draft an email, put a document in it, and send it off, and not worry about which version of that document are people using. And then you have to track it down through your email program as to which version is the latest version. In addition to that, for instance, in this email, I have a mention of technology partners SOW. This is a piece of data or metadata about this document that's not really related to that document. It's related to this email. But there is no real way to connect that document with this piece of metadata that others might find useful when they're looking for this document. Let me show you another example of an email that's problematic. So here I have a bunch of documents that I've attached to my email, and I have some data associated with it that I've described in my email. So I have things like these are the 3 documents I've attached, and these relate to project, SharePoint 2013, migration, for instance. Tech Partners presentation relates to ECM and enterprise search, for instance, and all this stuff is in the email, but is not in any of these documents. They might be in the content of the documents, but they're not really things that you can use to search these documents in your file shares. So if I say put all these documents also on a file share, probably include that link in my email. But the problem with that as well is that if I move this document, if I go about cleaning up my file share and I move this document, this email link does not work anymore. So how do you get your head around all these problems? How do you manage your content? How do you solve these problems? And this is where I think information management comes in. So information management, like I said, is not just about your content. It's about data management, whether it's documents or data that's related to your line of business applications or CRM applications or ERP applications. It's content management, and it's knowledge management. And when you talk about knowledge management, you're really talking about people and expertise, because that is the knowledge that is the domain knowledge that's contained in your organization, and you want to be able to tap into that to make things more efficient. So a little bit more about enterprise content. So if you want to think of enterprise content in the simplistic terms, it can be divided into three categories. Structured content, which is things that you store in your databases, which are structured. Unstructured content, like your documents, Excel files, PDF documents, so on and so forth. And expertise, which is more related to people and their experiences and their domain expertise. Right. So the idea is to come up with a blueprint, what we call the Tallan Blueprint Accelerator, to come up with a process that's structured and is based on best practices that you can do over and over again to get assets that you can use to make sense of all this information and data in your organization. At the core of this solution is the user. So users are core and central to the success and failure of any system, and your intranet is no different. So have you stopped and considered, for instance, the irony that we spend all our effort trying to make our customers and clients happy, but when it comes to our own employees, we think a well-designed and thoughtful architecture is not important. If your employees can't find information and get their job done efficiently, how can you expect that to translate into a happy experience for your customers and clients? The Blueprint Accelerator, actually, Tallan developed it over the years based on industry best practices, and it revolves around patterns and practices in the field of information architecture and content structure strategies in conjunction with some pragmatic and practical experiences that we've gained over the years. So what we'll do now is kind of go through some techniques and tools that you can leverage to actually make this blueprint a reality. The idea is to be able to get an inventory of your asset, organize and categorize the content, and create a taxonomy or ontology so that the content can be searched and can be found fast. And you can create relevant connections between your content, your people, and your expertise. The idea is to develop some core assets out of the IA process, and most of those are related to personas. You want to have a good site architecture, so you know where things are going. You also need a good governance structure, so that you know who is responsible and for creating that content, curating that content, who the users of the content are. And I have included wireframes and mockups here to also point out the significance of user experience. So whenever, especially with SharePoint, what you've seen is whenever you talk about design, user experience design, people usually shy away from it, actually run away from it. And the reason for that is through the years, there have been some bad experiences with development on a platform like SharePoint because it means so much to so many people, and it's very difficult to actually come up with a unified design that works for everyone. But it's an important process to actually develop those wireframes and mockups. So you create an interface that's inviting for your users, and you improve user adoption. Like I said before, you don't want users to go think of Google the first time when they want to work on content, but you want them to think of your intranet portal as the source of information, as a source of information that they can use to get their work done. And to do that, you have to have an interface that's inviting to the users, that's intuitive to the users. And that's the whole point of creating these wireframes and mockups. You could still use out-of-the-box functionality from SharePoint, but the idea is to make it such that to put these pieces together such that it makes more sense to the user. So the first tool or technique, I would say, to IA is mind mapping. This is where you visualize the information space in your organization. And there is no real, it's not a controlled process, but a more free-flowing process where people kind of map what comes to their mind first on a piece of paper and then connect the dots together to create a map of their organization, the map of how they use information in their organization. So once you've created a nice mind map, the usual mistake is that people stop at that stage, take that mind map, and try to create a site structure or create taxonomy right out of a mind map. The problem with that is that a mind map does not really have structure. It's more of getting the ideas out on a piece of paper. So what you want to do is not stop at the mind mapping stage, but to take the mind map and actually go through a structured exercise to create your site structure. And one of the techniques we use is called card sorting. So you basically take the ideas that you've developed in your mind map, create cards for the main topics, take your requirements as well as an input to this process, and lay down these cards, group these cards into categories and groups, let the users drive this process rather than IT or managers, so that while you're doing this exercise, you're also driving user adoption. If the users are involved, it's their process, they will take ownership automatically. One of the questions that comes up usually is that how many users do we need to do all this stuff? Business users don't have time to create a portal design. And most times there are just too many users in a meeting to actually make any good decisions towards IA or to help out with the IA process. So one of the studies that is being done on usability can also be used in the case of developing IA. As you can see from the graph, once you reach to a number of about 15, there is diminishing returns. What we have found through the years is a number between 5 and 10 is usually best, and you want to create smaller groups of users concentrated towards specific areas of information architecture. The points to remember, of course, is that business users, of course, they have other things to do, so use their time judiciously, guide them through the process. So create questionnaires for them beforehand, before you meet them, so you use their time effectively. Be agile. So instead of thinking about creating copious amounts of requirement documents and design documents and architecture documents, concentrate more on just enough documentation so as to be able to create your IA assets. Things usually change, and things will change. The IA process is not a static process, usually an organic process, and people think organically. Content evolves organically, and the interrelationships between content and people also evolve organically. So you need to understand the context in which a particular content is being used and evolve that concept over time. And keep that in mind when you're designing your system. So the IA process is an ongoing process. The initial IA process that you usually go through might be more involved than the continuous process, but the meaning of content and the context in which content is used usually changes over time. So make sure that your IA process is the assets that you generate from your IA are flexible enough to accommodate for that change. And one last point before we actually dive into a demo, actually a couple of more points before we dive into a demo, is about governance. And usually whenever we talk about governance, it's taken as a negative term, or it gives out a negative vibe, if you will. And the reason for that is that most organizations think about governance as a top-down approach instead of a bottom-up approach, or a mixture of bottom-up and a top-down. So the best practice approach is to understand what you're going to be using your portal for, or what are the different uses of your portal, and organize your governance accordingly. So you might have things that need to be governed more strictly. For instance, auditing requirements, compliance requirements, where there has to be a strict workflow to the process. And whereas areas like community sites or collaboration sites where you're actually trying to foster innovation and new ideas, you want to strive for a bottom-up approach where people are the ones who are managing their content, tagging content, commenting on ideas and content, and creating a dynamic environment that fosters that innovative and collaborative culture. The last part around IA is that once you have your mind map created, you take that mind map, go through some kind of a more structured process like card sorting to create a structure around that mind map, and so that you're able to translate that into a content management system or enterprise content management system like SharePoint. I won't go into the nitty-gritty details of the terminologies in SharePoint, but the whole point of this slide is just to say that it doesn't stop at mind mapping or card sorting. You have to take that as an input into the actual physical implementation of how your SharePoint site architecture is going to look. And this is just one way of showing your SharePoint site architecture. You could have team sites, internet sites. As I said, SharePoint provides a numerous number of templates to fit various needs for users. So you could create team sites, you could create personal sites, you could create extranet portals or wikis as well to manage all the content and the different ways people work together. And the final goal definitely is to be able to drive findability through search. SharePoint comes with a state-of-the-art search engine. It's built on the FAST technology that Microsoft acquired. It's a very rich search engine. It compares to Google and Bing, which are in the internet space, but FAST for SharePoint is in the intranet or extranet space. So whether you structure your content with folders, if your users are comfortable with folders, you don't have to get rid of them. You could still have content in folders, or you could have content that's more flat but have a hierarchical association through something like taxonomy, or you could have a completely flattened structure of unstructured data. Whatever be your mode of storing the content, the goal is to be able to find the content and create these connections between the content where they're stored so people can find relevant information, can reuse this information as they produce their own work products. So let's look at a demo of all we've talked about. So I'm not going to go through the process of actually creating the IA assets, but what I'm going to do is show you what would result from an IA process. So the first thing that we're going to take a look at is out-of-the-box SharePoint. Say, for instance, you didn't do any IA. You just took a file share, the file share that I showed you in a few slides ago, and I just moved that over to a document library. So this is exactly like what it was in the file share. So let me just zoom in a little bit so that you guys can see it. I have a document library here called Portal Documents. I have a few folders, and this is the folders and documents are ported directly from a file, a network share location. Right? I have not tagged the documents or have not done any IA. And this is, usually people buy a tool and expect the tool to magically manage the content. And my whole emphasis on this discussion is really to emphasize that that is not the case. The tool is not going to solve the problem. What would solve the problem is an IA process that you would have to go through, a structured IA process that would actually make sense of this content. So what I've done is I moved this content over. I did some analysis on this content, and I created some taxonomy hierarchical terms. So I'll show you where that stuff is stored, but let me open up another document library where I moved that content over. And this is the same document library, the same content, but it's flat. And I added 3 new columns to that document library. One related to project type, technology, and topic. Topic is generic to cover all the various topics that a document could go, and it's a multi-value field. So I could have a document that is labeled as training today, but it could be sales and training tomorrow, or it could be readiness training the day after that. So the idea is to be able to leverage taxonomy, but also create an IA that would grow with your organization and actually allow you to change the context in which view or use a document. So this library is, like I said, is a very flat library. It's got presentations, it's got Word documents, Excel files, and so on and so forth. But I've gone ahead and tagged all these documents. And the way to tag it is usually I'll do a quick edit of this document library just to show you that it's very easy to actually edit a document library and properties in SharePoint. You could do something like, if I wanted to change this technology tag to something else, I could pick it from, say I wanted to change it to BizDoc. So I'll go ahead and pick BizDoc from the list of my managed terms or controlled vocabulary. And I could, and if there were multiple documents that I wanted to tag with BizDoc, I could just drag and drop just like in Excel. And then if I click on Stop Editing, it's going to save that data for me. You can also use tools to do migrations. For instance, you can use a tool like Exceller that we've used a lot of times, Exceller File Loader, that takes file shares and moves it over into SharePoint and allows you to actually also do tagging. And I'll show you in a little bit how that interface looks and what you need to do in order to move content in bulk into SharePoint from a file share, for instance. In addition to the benefit that now when I'm looking at this document, I know what this document is for. It's a BizDoc related document that's related to training and custom development. So it gives me some meaning to that document. But say, for instance, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 documents here. Maybe I had 20 documents that were related to BizDoc development, BizDoc, and custom development. But I was not very sure whether I should open this document or this document. So in a file share, like we talked, you would have to click open the document, go through the document, so on and so forth. In SharePoint, you have a feature called document preview, right in your document libraries, and it provides a full fidelity view of your Office documents or PDF documents. So I could click in here, it loads up the document right in the browser, and I can actually look through and say, slide 4, this is not what I'm looking for. Maybe I should look at this document instead. And as you can see, the usability is very seamless. I could go from document to document, look at the document, find the document I'm looking for, and then click on it and open it up right in the browser if I wanted to, or in PowerPoint if I had PowerPoint installed on my client machine. So you have the ability now, even if you don't have the client installed on your desktop, you can actually open it up in the browser. So these are all out-of-the-box features, by the way, if you're wondering. Let me also show you another advantage of actually going through a process and thinking through your information architecture, information management strategies. So in the file share, I had these documents under folders. And if your users are used to working with folders, as we've been trained over the years to create folders and put our documents and content in folders, you can still provide that interface or ability for your users. So if they're not used to looking through columns of data, you could have a single column of PowerPoint slides here, and you could enable on this document library what is called Managed Metadata Navigation. So what you see on the left-hand side here under the heading Portal Docs is a Managed Metadata Navigation for this library. So what this does is it goes through the library and highlights all the tags related to all the metadata columns in your library. So for instance, I have terms related to Tallan.topic, Tallan.technology, and so on and so forth. And I can drill down just like I would to a document folder and say, for instance, I want sales. I'll click on sales, and now my document library is filtered by the Tallan topic for sales. So I can go through the Tallan sales document. On the other hand, if I wanted to actually search on something else. Like, for instance, I wanted to search on SharePoint, but I was not sure if it is a project type or a topic. I could come in here, type in search under all tags, and it tells me, it gives me an option of choosing which term to search on. So as you can see in my managed metadata term set store, I have SharePoint as a project type, I have SharePoint as a technology, I have SharePoint as a practice, and I have SharePoint as keywords. So I could use any one of these terms if I was using keywords, for instance, to select that to do my search. So if I apply this filter, it's going to filter down my results by that tag. So it provides you a way to improve user adoption by giving an interface that a user is familiar with. So if they're still familiar with folders, they can still use this navigation hierarchy to get to the documents that they're looking for. It also helps to provide an interface for the controlled vocabulary, because then people don't have to remember all the topics that they can search by. They just have to use this navigation. Okay. So that's an additional way to actually interact with your document library. In addition to that, like I said, search is a big piece of SharePoint portals and how SharePoint portals are implemented and your information architecture strategy. And you'll see that in SharePoint all over the place. So you'll see a search box here for the document library. You'll see a search for your site, for instance, and we'll see in a little bit search for your whole farm. So maybe you have 500 different document libraries that you want to search through, and you want to search through the term SharePoint sales, or you want to find all the sales documents or all the documents related to a particular area, for instance, BizDoc or custom development. So how would you do that? And that's where SharePoint search comes in. Before I dive into that, let me just show you how the search on a document library would work. So for instance, I would come in here and I could put in sales, and this is keyword based, so I could put SharePoint sales, or I could just use like what you would do on Google, like a phrase for searching content. And it would come back with all the content that not only has SharePoint sales that is tagged, but also content that has SharePoint sales inside of it. So inside of the documents, if there is a term SharePoint or sales, it's going to return that document to me. So let's look at some of the sites. So we talked about site structure as part of your information architecture, and we talked about some site templates. The portal home page that I have here is basically I just created something that would act as a dashboard or a landing page for my intranet. So I have some news on the right-hand side. I have some key documents and some calendar events, some quick links that I could browse to. You might wonder where is this news coming from? So the way this is actually implemented is also through search, and that's where thinking through how your users actually would benefit from an intranet portal, how they would actually use the intranet portal is important, because this is where you would make your decisions of how to aggregate content and provide a seamless interface for your users. So what I've done here is actually use search as my data source to go and crawl all my content in the whole farm, all the news content, and display it right here in this interface. For instance, this is in a different site, relates to best practices, and was released on 4/10/2013. So it's just a list of all the new events that are happening around the organization, for instance. Let's look at some other templates that you can actually create. So one of the big enhancements to SharePoint 2013 from previous versions is the ability to, is the social, the enterprise social features. So let's look at, in terms of personalization for users, what SharePoint provides. So I'm going to open up the My Site view. So this is My Site page, which handles all my activity and kind of aggregates my activity throughout the SharePoint farm in a central area. So I could have conversations with other people in the organization. I could hashtag things And if I wanted to actually go and take a look at other conversations or documents or content in SharePoint that are also tagged with the same hashtag, I could click on this, and it would bring up conversations that have similar tagging. So let me just go back to this view, for instance. So I could also provide the ability for others to find me based on my expertise areas. For instance, if I want to let people know that if they want to know about ECM or web content management or software development, they can get in touch with me. I can edit this page and add those expertise areas in here. And I could then, if somebody else goes into search and searches for ECM, they would actually find me. So let me show you that. Let me go back to search and just search for ECM, for instance. So I've got some content here for ECM, but what I wanted to show you was the connections. So it actually found me as well because I had ECM in About Me. And this is what, we'll be talking about in the next webinar as well, is creating these connected systems, what we call as connected knowledge systems, so that you can actually tie in your content with people and conversations and so on. In addition to that, if I go to conversations, all the conversations that were tagged with ECM as well, and I can look at conversations to that term. So as you can see now, when you're finding content, you're not just finding content, but you're finding expertise by finding people, and you're finding what other people are talking about in terms of that particular term or that particular keyword, for instance, right? And what are the different activities going on in your organization. Let me just go back here real quick to the portal landing page and show you real quick the other sites that I've created here. So this is what is called a community site, where people can create groups, invite others to this group, and work together towards a particular project or goal or idea. Maybe there's a new concept, maybe there's a new idea that people are working through, and you could invite people together. So in this case, I've invited everybody in the SharePoint community at Tallan to the site, including somebody who's not in the SharePoint group, like for instance, the sales team. And we can communicate here. It also makes it fun a little bit because you can then attach badges and create categories. So for instance, I have a badge for Michael, who's an expert, a badge for Jay Lynn, who's a sales guru, and so on and so forth. So it makes it a little bit more fun in the organization than a typical intranet that people think about, which is organized by departments and business units and is much more strictly governed. So one thing I wanted to show you also was the team site. So if you were, say, organized around projects, or you wanted to get a project team together and manage your task list and so on and so forth, you could create a team site. And what the team site provides you with is a visual image of how your project is progressing, a summary of whether your tasks are late or on time, a place to collaborate with other team members, also a place to save your content, whether it's videos, images, or other types of content. And then lastly, the practice wiki site. So I'm kind of concentrating more on communities and collaboration, but you also have other sites like publishing sites and that are more related to business process modeling and also can be governed much more strictly. This is a wiki site. You can actually edit this page either through HTML or to a rich text editor. In this case, I have created a bunch of links to potential sites or topics that could be potential sites, and I've used the usual wiki syntax to create a site. So I put these square brackets along this term or this topic, and if I click save and go back to this topic, it actually puts a link here, and if I click on this, it asks me to create a new site. Go ahead and click on that and create a blank site where I can go and enter text, images, and so on and so forth in a free form ad hoc way. So it provides a good way to collaborate and an interface for users that's very easy to use. Lastly, I wanted to cover some search topics, kind of giving you a feeler for what we're going to cover on the next webinar. So this webinar was really talking about foundations, laying a good foundation for your information architecture so you can do all this cool stuff in SharePoint. You can find your content. You can have people work together, and you can create these areas of activity and innovation in your organization using things like team sites and community sites. But I also wanted to show you the features in search. So this is basically an examples of no-code solutions. So you can create very powerful search run applications in SharePoint with very little effort. So what I've done here is some examples that I've put together. Now, you wouldn't actually implement it this way, but just to show you that search is really powerful and you can do a lot of stuff with search. So let me show you first, if I wanted to create an application in SharePoint where if a user logged into, say, a landing page for my portal, I would have a place for all their conversations. So instead of, showing the news, for instance, on the landing page, I could show them my conversations. And it's as easy as, if I click on this link here, this is basically search showing all the conversations I've had on this portal till date, and all the threads of conversations as well. And it's very easy to actually implement if you know the syntax of how to call search and use search for the specific purpose that you're going to be using. So in this case, I'm saying people, my name, and is document true, or content class is list item. And I am telling it to go to the conversation vertical. So let's look at that item, for instance, real quick. So this is basically what it is. So what I'm doing is I'm sending this link to this particular page, conversationsresults.aspx, which is just a page in SharePoint. I'm sending a keyword, and I'm actually creating a specific keyword with some giving some context. So I'm saying where people is my name, and where it's a document, and it's a list item. So you don't have to really worry about this, but what I wanted to show you was just by having this syntax behind the scenes, I could create a search application where this query could run on my portal home so that if I log in here, I could get the conversation. So that's how the What News is implemented. So I've actually created a custom query here to go out and gather all the news items from all over my portal and display it here. So you can create some very powerful applications in SharePoint to allow users to get to content that they use on a daily basis. Another thing that you could do is create synonyms on the fly. For instance, if I wanted to say, SharePoint and portals is one and the same term. So if I'm searching for SharePoint, it should also return portals. I could use something like words SharePoint portal, and if I click on this, SharePoint is going to return to me results where I have SharePoint portals, or just SharePoint, or just portals as in my results set. So we're going to cover in more detail next time around, search and findability, and also talk about how to create mobile applications, or what's the story behind the support for mobile devices with SharePoint. So going back to my slide deck here, and just to summarize what we talked about today, is that information architecture is where form, function, and content intersect. It's very important for your process, and you have to have a structured process to implement this. You can reap a lot of benefits once you do go through a good IA process and implement that IA process for your content. Just a reminder, we'll have our next webinar on October 24th, and we're going to cover collaboration in more detail, We're going to talk about faceted search and more search applications and custom search applications, and we'll talk about mobile technology.